that. So this is kind of cool here on the bottom left. This is a benthic fuel cell, right? So a lot of the research in these was done with the Navy, actually, the US Navy. And so what these fuel cells are actually doing is they can use some microorganisms that live at the bottom of like the ocean or a river, and then they can use that, the power that's generated to, say, do monitoring of temperature or ocean currents or something like that. So it's essentially, you just drop these in and then you start getting information, and then you don't have to worry about changing batteries or batteries polluting, because there's no battery in there. It's just bacteria and stuff that's already in the cell.
Yeah, doing their thing. And so this last image I put up here because there's kind of a question in research, how are they doing this, right? You need wires to like transfer electricity. Bacteria wires. So they hook up together in these tiny little chains, and they'll go like forage for their food and their electrons and transfer those electrons to these chains of bacteria, which they've also been observed using as like lassos. So another kind of little superpower. So that's my spiel. Andy.
All right. So I'm gonna stand up here. It's okay. Can everybody hear me? Okay, even in the back. Is it okay? Yeah, all right, cool. So I'm going to tell you about microbes living in all sorts of crazy, ridiculous environments where it really doesn't seem like anything should be able to survive whatsoever, but they do. So let's talk about extreme cold environments first. All right, so in Antarctica, you may or may not know, there are actually deep underground lakes. So you burrow thousands of feet through the ice, and there's actually underwater lakes there. And so people wanted to investigate, is it possible for something to survive in Antarctica below the ice in these things that are just like barely above freezing? So like the temperature of these things is basically at the freezing point. If the liquid got any colder, then it would be frozen. So a bunch of researchers in 2013, they had this huge team with like 15 different universities from 5 different countries, and they all got together to drill into 2,500 feet of ice down into these subglacial lakes called Lake Willans. And what they found was absolutely astonishing. As you may guess, it was absolutely teeming with life. It was not just like there were a few microbes hanging out. There were thousands of microbes. There were thousands of microbes in every droplet of water from thousands of different species. So these things are living like in these super, super cold environments. But honestly, that is just, to be part of the pun, the tip of the iceberg. So this guy over here, this is a lichen. Have any of you heard of a lichen before? A bunch of you. Okay, yeah, basically everybody. So lichens are like fungi living with bacteria. They're like, let's get jiggy together because it's better for both of us in a symbiotic relationship. And these things, so how many of you know what photosynthesis is? Like, if you can say the word, okay, good. I don't want to throw it. So if I say words that you don't know, just let me know. But yeah, so photosynthesis, taking sunlight and using it for energy. Well, these guys can do that. You know, it's like what a plant does. These guys can do that at minus 24 Celsius. Minus 24 Celsius is 24 Celsius below the freezing point. So like these things are just like, hey, we're ice, but we're also getting sunlight energy gain. So which is just ridiculous. So researchers also went, so I was talking about microbes living in cold water. Well, it turns out microbes can also live just straight up in ice. So researchers went 1.9 miles into a glacier in Greenland, and they extracted some ice from that to get an ice core, and they found that there were microbes in it that were still alive after 120,000 years. So these microbes had lived 120,000 years in this ice, and they were still alive afterwards. And it just got crazier. So then researchers were looking at Tibetan ice, and they found 14 different species of bacteria in this ice, and they were 750,000 years old. So these things are like almost 1 million years old, and they've just been sitting there in the ice, and when the researchers thaw them, they come back to life. They're still alive. And this is particularly crazy because we know that DNA decays over time. You know, that's why we don't have dinosaurs. That's why we can't, like, Jurassic Park our way to dinosaurs. Right? So, and this is even why mammoths, which are maybe only a couple 10,000 years old, are still super hard. It's hard to recover DNA from them. The DNA that's inside of them degrades over time. So why doesn't the DNA in these microbes degrade? How can they survive for so long? It turns out that while they're sitting in this frozen block of ice, they can still repair their DNA. They're not just in stasis. They're not just hanging out going to sleep. They're actually doing stuff while being frozen. And if that's not a cool superpower, I don't know what is. I want to just sleep for 1 million years. Why not? All right.
Oh, Andy, can I add something real
yes.
quick? To keep with the theme of this panel, so there's some research going on at ASU and lots of other places that are looking at like viruses and pathogens that are like thawing out of like the ice caps right now with global warming, and I just always think of it as like some supervillain that's been frozen for thousands of years and is like ready to come back. So
because maybe there's some horrible pathogen that like a million years ago affected our ancestors or something and may come back to life. But to be honest, I think it's unlikely.
It's unlikely. But
yeah, it's unlikely. But because we're almost an extreme environment to these microbes. Like they don't want to live in our bodies; they want to live in the cold. We're too hot for that. But so speaking of hot, there are also microbes that can live in really ridiculously extremely hot environments. So there's this machine called an autoclave. It's used in like hospitals and in research labs to sterilize stuff. The idea is you heat stuff up so hot that it makes the equipment sterile so you can use it for your medical stuff. So it heats up even hotter than boiling, and the general consensus was, okay, we picked a temperature that is hot enough to kill all life, kill all microbes with this autoclave. And then this guy showed up. So strain 121, it's a single-celled microbe that is found in one of these thermal vents, which is basically this like undersea thing that is just like puking out all of these toxic gases from the interior of the earth into the ocean. And they isolated this microbe from it. They put this bad boy in the autoclave and it doubled in size while being right? It was just like, it actually thrived in this environment that we had designed to sterilize stuff. So it just goes to show you that microbes can live in all sorts of incredible environments. And that has some really interesting implications that we're going to get into later. So, but just going off on this, it's like, okay, you're sitting here in this hydrothermal vent, you're sitting here 1,000 miles below the ice. What are they eating? What are they doing to survive in these locations? How do they do that? So it turns out that microbes can really, really eat some crazy things. So we have this group of organisms called the lithotrophs. Litho literally means rock, and troph means eater. So these things basically eat rocks. So they essentially poop sulfuric acid onto a rock to dissolve it, which frees a whole bunch of minerals in the rock. And they consume those minerals for energy. So they're essentially just eating rocks. They pretty much look at a stack of rocks like the rock was. All right, so these things have, these bacteria can actually slowly kind of burrow into caves and like create these, have caves called karsts, have areas that are kind of cleared out by these microbes. And they eat all sorts of things that we would consider to be just straight up poisonous. So, for example, this type of bacteria, they're called anomox, and they basically eat ammonia, you know, the thing you clean and sterilize stuff with also. But they don't just eat ammonia, they turn it into a chemical called hydrazine, which is rocket fuel. So it's like, okay, ammonia in one end, rocket fuel out the other. Life finds a way, there you go. So other types of microbes consume hydrogen sulfide, which is a poisonous gas, carbon monoxide, most of you probably know is a poisonous gas, and all sorts of other things that would very much kill us, and they're just like, yeah, more please. So all of this has really interesting implications. One of the reasons people study this, there's lots of reasons, but one of them is because this has implications for whether microbes could possibly survive in space. Because space is also a really harsh environment. It's very cold, it has extreme temperature. It also has deadly radiation. And so researchers actually took microbes into the International Space Station and kind of put it on the surface of the International Space Station. And they're just like, okay, have fun in space for a few years, see you later. Come back a year later, the microbes are still alive on the outside of the International Space Station. And there have been lots of experiments like this that have shown that it is possible for microbes to survive in space. But that's just in space. So there's also different areas in space that seem like they kind of resemble areas, extreme environments on Earth. So for example, Jupiter's moon Europa, shown here, has a vast subsurface ocean similar to what's going on with Antarctica. It's got a mineral-rich rocky floor, might have some of those nice chemicals for the bacteria to eat. And Jupiter's gravity tugging on the planet is what keeps these, like that's why there's liquid in it, because it creates energy that heats it up just enough to not be frozen anymore. So it's a very interesting and open question. Could there be life in these areas? Or is there life already there, or could life from Earth survive there if it were to get there? Like what if an asteroid hits Earth, blows off a chunk, and it ends up in one of these moons? And Saturn's moon Titan has these big lakes that are actually not full of water, but full of liquid methane. And so it just raises all of these interesting questions. So is it possible for life in these locations? If you would have asked us a few decades ago, we would have said there's no way that anything can survive in these crazy environments. But these days, it seems like we're not sure at all. Maybe something could definitely survive. So microbes can do a lot of really cool stuff. All right, let it be random.
All right, so I'm also going to follow Andy's lead and just stand up. Can everyone hear me in the back? Cool. Okay. So Andy talked a lot about microbes like surviving in really crazy places. You know, like eating rocks, living in autoclaves. I have to clean autoclaves. It's terrifying when I know there are microbes living in those autoclaves. Thanks, Andy. But I want to go a different route. Instead of just surviving, I want to talk about control. So in superheroes like nerd culture and stuff like that, most powers have something to do with control. So you've got the Ice King who can control ice, the Human Torch can control fire, you can control metal, and Hal Jordan can sometimes control his feelings, other times kind of sad. But I think, and I'm a little bit of a nerd here because I do a lot of research on plant biotechnology, I think the coolest superpower of all, and feel free to debate me on this is a Comicon, is plant control. Okay, I can see your disappointment. Let me explain. So, poison ivy is a perfect example of why this superpower is just the coolest superpower ever. She can control plants. If you guys don't know who she is, she can control plants. She can bring people over to her side. She can use Vine Whip. It's super effective against water types. And she can make Batman feel something, anything. But what does poison ivy have to do with microbes? So, as Andy was talking about, his favorite microbe is Agrobacterium tumefaciens, and I call it the poison ivy of biotechnology, much to the chagrin of my supervising professor. He's like, why? Why are you doing that? It's there's so many cooler powers. Anyway, let's call it Agro because A, its name's way too long, and B, because child process is underappreciated. Agro is special. It can transfer DNA across kingdoms. Now, what does that mean? Well, think about it. There are a bunch of kingdoms of life. There are plants, there are animals, there are bacteria, there are 6 or 7 kingdoms at this point. And how you get a human to express plant DNA, or plant DNA, or plants to express human DNA, or bacteria to express, I don't know, fungi DNA. Well, that's really hard to do. There aren't really many natural ways of doing that. It sounds pretty crazy and kind of scary. But luckily, this thing happens to be everywhere. It actually lives in the soil. So if you go anywhere that isn't Arizona that actually has soil, but what does this do? Why is it a supervillain? Why am I not talking about a superhero that has plant control powers? Well, it gives plants cancer. Basically, Agrobacterium causes a disease in plants called crown gall disease. And it transfers some of this DNA inside one of its circular DNA storage things called plasmids. Any Bioshock fans out there? And it takes the tumor-causing DNA from this thing called the transfer DNA, or the tDNA. It's super creative. I mean, we're going to patent this name. And it eats the tumors. The tumors are full of stuff the Agrobacterium needs to live. And so it's kind of crazy. tDNA integrates into the plant's genome and basically just hijacks the plant's genome, kind of like a virus would or any other disease would. And it's stopping a plant, be a tumor instead. Now, I want to save the plants, okay? Save the animals, save the plants. I'm not okay with this. And I don't think a lot of my other research colleagues are either. We like plants. So why don't we just make it not do that and kill 2 birds with 1 stone and manipulate the crap out of it to make it give what we want to other plants and make plants grow crazy stuff? Well, that's exactly what they did. So they basically use these DNA scissors called restriction enzymes. They're just proteins that snip at specific sites in DNA, and they snipped out the cancer-causing parts of the tDNA in the plasmid. That's this crazy. Whoa.
Spoilers.
Let's see. There we go. This is the tDNA. This is what causes the bad stuff to happen in the plants. This black stuff, for example, could be anything that we want. We just put this inside a sequence, and we pop it into the tDNA plasmid. And now we have Agrobacterium with the circular DNA storage with the genes that we want inside of it. And you can basically just take it, you shoot it into a leaf of a plant, and you get flowering. And that's, we're working on that little side effect, creating sentient flowers. Suffice to say, we can put anything we want, really, within reason, into plants and make it expressive. So why does that matter? Why is that cool? Well, vaccines. We can make vaccines. Vaccines basically work by taking little parts and bits and pieces of diseases and grounding them up and then putting them into people in a way that's more attenuated sometimes. You don't just give them smallpox or anything. You take little bits and pieces of proteins on the outside of smallpox and give it to people. These can be used to take those same proteins, because DNA codes for proteins, mind you, take those proteins and put them into plants and have the plants start expressing those parts. Why is that good? Because basically you can grow these things called edible vaccines, for one example, and you also make a lot cheaper vaccines. Imagine going to like a pharmacy and going to the pharmacist like, hey, I want a vaccine against chickenpox. Like, okay, here, eat this potato and it'll be fine. That'd be absurd, right? Well, it's actually a thing that's in development right now. Transgenic corn, transgenic potatoes, some other things in the lab. I'm pretty sure Andy's growing a transgenic tomato. It's gonna be crazy. You can also make pharmaceuticals, and that's how this makes Batman feel again. You can make, like, you know, antidepressants and stuff to make them. You can basically insert the DNA that codes for like the production of pharmaceutical compounds into these plants, and it'll produce them for basically a lot cheaper than you normally would with other bacteria. And finally, GMOs are a huge application of this agrobacterium. Basically, because you can like insert traits into plants using this agrobacterium, you can give things like more nutrition, you can make them more longer lasting in like natural preservative ways instead of like using crazy like weird chemical preservatives. You can make them safer to eat. Maybe you find like that peanuts have this thing that cause allergies. I didn't know that. You could maybe use agrobacterium to edit that out. You can use disease resistance.